courtesy of Sam Myers Bookstore. Tonight's featured guests will sign books at the conclusion of the program here in the auditorium at the two tables in front. You will be called to the signing table by the number on your ticket, and I'll provide directions when the program concludes. Now, this is important. At this time, I would ask that everyone please turn off all noise-making electronic devices. So tonight, we are delighted to partner once again with the Poetry Foundation. The Chicago Public Library has had a long and creative relationship with the Poetry Foundation, working together to celebrate and promote poetry and literature. And we look forward to tonight's program and many future programs. So to launch tonight's program, I am very pleased to welcome Robert Toledo, President of the Poetry Foundation. Welcome.
So, good evening. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this Poetry Day reading with Carolyn Forche and Jamal May. At the outset, I want to thank everybody here at the library, but particularly Commissioner Brian Bannon and, of course, Craig Davis. At the Poetry Foundation, I want to thank Justine Haka, Chelsea Avery, and especially Steve Young for their administrations in making tonight possible. And I would like to do a shout out to the Louder Than a Bomb University students, who I think are here. Poetry Day falls among the liveliest and most elegant traditions of the Poetry Foundation, and originating out of Poetry Magazine in 1955, remains one of the oldest continuous poetry reading series in the country. Robert Frost was legendarily that inaugural Poetry Day reader, and in the decades since, the distinguished list spans Sandburg, Eliot, Moore, Auden, Lowell, Berriman, Brooks, Merrill, and Bishop, onto Ashbery, Dove, Bowen, Glick, C.D. Wright, among many others, and most recently Seamus Heaney and Robert Pinsky. The Poetry Day series notably presents poets at all stages of their careers, established and emerging. That distinguished tradition continues tonight with two gifted, bold, and original poets, Jamal May and Carolyn Forche. As different as these writers are in styles or generation, both were born in Detroit, and both, for all their elaborate and sophisticated involvement in the craft, music, and form of poetry, partake of a vision of a poet as engaged. Poetry finds its own best defense in pleasure and art. Yet at the turn of the 21st century, the actions we perform as poets and readers of poetry turn out to be inherently social and political. We live inside a culture that increasingly assumes we aren't paying close attention, that increasingly assumes, in fact, that we don't know how. Close attention to language in this context is an act of resistance that observes the flexibility of language, registering the implications and resonances, focusing comparisons and connections, and tracking steadily larger patterns and designs. This close attention to language in poetry inevitably opens up into history, even as it furnishes a ready template for engaging other arts such as film or painting, or other social performances such as speeches, advertisements, and news. For both Jamal May and Carolyn Forche, poetry moves along a continuum of the aesthetic, the personal, and the political. As May recently suggested in an interview, I've been thinking a lot about poetry being pretty much the only art form in which the practitioners are regularly called upon to explain if and how their art will solve society's ills. I've never seen or heard an interview with Jack White, he continues, that asks him how his guitar solo on Ball and Biscuit will cure cancer and stave off the zombie apocalypse. I once worried about the fairness of this paradigm, but I'm starting to see it as a show of respect. That people keep wondering how poetry will change the world seems to start with the implicit assumption that it could. I believe it already does, but not in the singular immediate way that seems to be demanded by some to justify the creation of literature. It is one of the many human endeavors that taken together help to repair our minds into more thoughtful devices. Or similarly, as Forche once proposed also in an interview, poetry is part of that world, and poetry is this sort of spiritual expression of it. Poetry is where the language discovers itself and where language enables us to experience experience. Poetry is what maintains our capacity for contemplation and difficulty. Poetry is where that contemplation and difficulty converses with itself. Poetry is a very important endeavor. It's so important, it's so sacred a practice. The way in which it's been commodified is an angering problem for me. I don't want it to be that way. I'll continue to write it out of joy and longing to do so. Jamal will read first, and then directly after him, Carolyn. Jamal May is an editor and filmmaker, as well as a poet. His debut book, Hum, at once elegiac and celebratory, stakes out a complex soundscape that stays variously alert to the shifting exteriors of situation and words, while also always breaking through to the often devastating sounds inside and underneath those words. His accolades include the Beatrice Hawley Award, the Spirit of Detroit Award, and the American Library Association Notable Award. Carolyn Forché is a gifted translator and inspired editor, along with her poems. Her collections include Gathering the Tribes, The Country Between Us, The Angel of History, and Blue Hour. Few poets, as I've been suggesting, so intricately insinuate abstraction and intimacy, the lyrical and global. In a pair of wondrous and indispensable anthologies, she's advanced the poetry of witness, first in Against Forgetting, 20th Century Poetry of Witness, and just this year, the Poetry of Witness, a tradition in English, 1500 to 2001, co-edited with Duncan Wu, that proposes nothing less than a rethinking of the entire English canon. So please join me now in welcoming first Jamal May and then Carolyn Forché.
Thank you. I just want to thank the foundation and everybody that made this event possible. I'm so honored to be reading with Carolyn Forché, and just really grateful that you all showed up. Thanks for that. Because as John Mulaney said, like, it's so easy to not do things that you would never do anything is amazing. So I was fussing like over the what poems to read. I wanted to read some stuff from the book Hum, but also a lot of new work from my second manuscript on the big book of exit strategies. And so I came up with a game plan, and of course, like threw it out the window as I was standing over there. So we're gonna start with a new poem called Shift. Acting on an anonymous tip, a shift supervisor at the runaway shelter strip searched 6 teenagers and Mrs. Xavier, who was taping mouths of talkative students shut by the time she neared retirement. Mr. Vickers, a skilled electrician in his day, didn't adapt when fuses became circuit breakers, a fact that didn't stop him from tinkering in our basement until the house was consumed in flame. I used to want to be this bad at a job. I wanted to show up drunk to staff meetings when the PowerPoint slides were already dissolving into each other, but I had this bad habit of showing up on time and more sober than any man should be when working audiovisual hospitality in a 3-star hotel that was a 4-star hotel before he started working there. When the entire North Atlantic blacked out, every soul in the Hyatt Regency Dearborn flooded the parking lot, panicked about terrorists and rapture, while I plugged in microphones and taped down cables by flashlight. You know, in case whatever cataclysm unfolded didn't preempt the meetings. Meetings before which I try to sell Children's Hospital a $15 rental on a $9 laser pointer, $35 for a flip chart, but extra paper on the house. Is it good to be good at a job if that job involves you convincing a children's hospital to spend the hospital's $900 on a 3-day rental of a $700 LCD projector? I don't know if it's better to be good at a bad job or bad at a good job, but there must be some kind of satisfaction in doing a job so poorly you are never asked to do it again. Now, I'm not saying he's a hero, but there is a guy out there who overloaded a transformer and made a difference. Because in a moment, sweating through my suit, groping in the dark when my boss was already home, I learned that I'd work any job this hard. Ache like this to know I can always ache for something. There's a hell for people like me. When we shovel coal, we have mined ourselves into furnaces that burn the flesh from our bones nightly. And we never miss a shift. me, she was like, yo, is that poem, so the poem is called I Do Have a Scene, and my partner's first book is called Scene. She was like, yo, did you write that poem about Tarfia? And I was like, oh, I didn't know it when I wrote it. I wrote that like the summer, like a few months before I actually met her. And she was like, that doesn't mean it's not about her. I was like, whoa. So you had that moment where you're like, because I know, like, I was writing it, but I feel like everything was kind of an amalgamation of different things, Like, people would ask me, yo, what's that poem about? It's a lot of different ideals in the poem. And but then I realized that when she said that, I kind of went back, and when the books arrived, I went through it and realized that, like, there was this woman I was writing towards through the whole book, like, in all these different moments that I didn't know yet when I was working on it. And so now she's, like, here hanging out with me, and she's, like, my favorite poet. So I'm reading a poem for Tarfia Fajula called I Do Have a Scene. And I'm going to read it 3 ways. It's in a form called a contrapuntal, which means there's a poem on the left side and a poem on the right side. When you read them across, it's a third poem. So when you hear me say the title again, that's not me on a record skip. That's just me starting over and reading it one of the 3 ways. I do have a scene, and you see it, there for you in the center of my chest. Actually, let me read this differently. I do have a scene, and you see it, there for you to pull, a chrome zipper, a hollow from belly to thigh, large enough for your puncture. Pull apart until muscle, sinew, and organ are awake in your room. Woman, here with plump thumbs. Woman I fell for. Careful seamstress. You stitch my selvage as it frays, but do you know how to be thread spooled through? I do have a scene. In the center of my chest, or strings, interlocking throat to sternum, or there is only a hole barely opening. Come soon. My halves billow open, and right there, pulsing within reach, woman with slender fingers. Hello, you needle in my sternum. You know how ragged I've been, and why I've always wanted the sewing machine of your hands. I do have a scene, and you see it, there for you in the center of my chest, or strings to pull, a chrome zipper, interlocking throat to sternum, a hollow from belly to thigh, or there is only a hole, barely large enough for your opening. Come soon, puncture, pull apart until my halves billow open and muscle, sinew, and organ are right there, pulsing, awake in your room. Woman, here, within reach. Woman with slender fingers. Woman with plump thumbs, with slender fingers. Woman I fell for. Hello, you careful seamstress. You needle in my sternum. Stitch my selvage as it frays. You know how ragged I've been, but do you know how and why I've always wanted to be thread spooled through the sewing machine of your hands? This is a newer poem called The Gun Joke. It's funny, she says, how many people are shocked by this shooting and the next and next and the next. She doesn't mean funny as in funny. She means funny as in blood soup tastes funny when you stir in soil. Stop me if you haven't heard this one. A young man, old man, teenage boy walks into a club, theater, daycare, empties a magazine into a crowd of strangers, family, students. Ever hear the one about the shotgun? What do you call it when a shotgun tests a liquor store's bulletproof glass? What do you call it? What is the difference between a teenager with his hands up and a paper target charging at a cop? What do you call it when a man sets his own house on fire, takes up a sniper position, and waits for firefighters? Stop me if you haven't heard this one before. The first man to pull a gun on me said it was only a joke, but he never so much as smiled. The second said, this is definitely not a joke, and then his laughter crackled through me like electrostatic. It's funny how that works. When she says funny, she means funny as in crazy, And crazy as in this shouldn't happen. This shouldn't happen as in something is off. Something is off as in funny. Funny as in off. As in ever since a small caliber bullet chipped his spine, your small friend walks kind of funny. His smile is off. The sky now black with birds. If I tell you, riot helmets outnumbered the protesters who, after Troy Davis was executed, stuck around to throw useless punches into the courthouse grass, while a woman lay sprawled on the lawn clutching her Bible, the green seed beginning to memorize the shape of her grief. If I say death, your death, and have such power over the side, how many cranes will it take to lift her out of this drowning? If I tell you, white supremacist Lawrence Brewer was executed only 5 hours earlier for the death of James Byrd. If I ask you to look for birds foraging between Brewer's intricate tattoos, I don't mean to distract you from the cross that also burned on his arm that day. I don't expect you to stare into a graffiti of iron crosses and spider webs scrawled across flesh and find a thrush vibrating with bird song. But I hope you'll understand why I listen for more than the calling of crows. I wanted Brewer dead. So dead, my tongue swelled fat with hexes. So fat, I wonder how could forgive ever fit inside of my mouth? Yet somehow, it's always there fluttering behind the larynx of Ross Byrd, this man whose father was dragged urine-soaked by Brewer behind a truck. Watch him say, forgive. I swear, the word has feathers. I want to learn to get its wings between my teeth before more retribution blots out the sky. If I tell you that glare flickered off of a cop's visor and startled one crow away from the murder that had flattened the sky into inky pieces, I want you to watch it close enough to notice that its feathers are not black at all. Like bruises and ink, they are only this full-bodied purple, a purple so deep and so rich your eyes will swear to you it is black the next time you see it spread across sky. Watch it spread like ink into a chest stilled by the drip of pancuronium bromide. It's that moment you know the muscles have locked. And if it is said, the injection is humane, I mean to say this is humanity. No crack of rope, no jerk of limb, no clenched jaw or bloated face, no reek rising, twisted in smoke from a cooked torso. We mean to say there is nothing to disturb the nest between our ribs. There is nothing to make a heartbeat rumble like a murder of so many wings. So something that's interesting about Hum was that I felt like there was like all of these birds through the book that people didn't notice. You know, everybody was like in a hurry to talk to me about like years and stuff. You know, and I arranged the book in a way that it would like create that feeling of machinery, even though there's poems that kind of go all over the place in it. But like just thinking about that, it became a metaphor for me. Like this notion that like people look at a place like Detroit, they don't see any of the birds, no matter how many there are. So this is a poem from the second manuscript called There Are Birds Here. And I'm very grateful for the Poetry Foundation publishing this poem and also giving it an award. So really appreciate Don Cher for like giving, I wanted this poem to reach as many people as humanly possible because I wanted to say my piece about Detroit. You know, the Detroit conversation is very narrow. It's just like, you know, it's very one-sided, and I want to kind of say something else about it because you either get that or you get the kind of lazy art of like, yay, Motown, we're awesome. So I kind of want to get something else, and Poetry Foundation really gave a platform and let it get to a lot of people. I get emails from school teachers whose students have been memorizing the poem, and so I'm really grateful for that. There are birds here. There are birds here, So many birds here is what I was trying to say when they said the birds were metaphors for this trap between fences and buildings. No, the birds are here to root around for bread the girls' hands tear and toss like confetti. No, I didn't say the bread was torn like cotton. I said confetti. And no, I don't mean the confetti a tent can make out of a building. I mean the confetti a boy can't stop smiling about. And no, his smile is not much like a skeleton at all. And no, his neighborhood is not like a war zone. I'm trying to say his neighborhood is as tattered and feathered as anything else, as shadow pierced by sun and light parted by shadow dance as anything else. But they won't stop saying how lovely the ruins, how ruined the lovely children must be in your birdless city. I think I'll do another newish poem. It's a short one. This is Ode to the White Line Swallowing Horizon. Apologies to the moths that die in service to my windshield's cross-country journey. Apologies to the fine country cooking vomited into a rest stop bathroom. Apologies to the rest stop janitor, to the mop, galvanized bucket, sawdust, and push broom, the failed tree it was cut from, dulled saw, blistered hand, I offer my apologies. To the road, to the white line swallowing horizon, I've used you almost up. I'm sorry I don't know another way to push the charcoal outline of that house into the ocean dark behind me. For being a grown man with a boogeyman at his back. Apologies to the grown man growing out of a splintering boy's body. Apologies to the splinters, little ones. You should have been a part of something whole. Alright, so I'm just gonna read a couple more. Yeah, okay, I got time. Okay, cool. So I wanna read another poem to embarrass Sophia, I guess. Before I read this last poem. All right, this poem is called. Oh, there it is. All right, this poem is called "This Is How I Know It Might Work," and it's after a poet named Matthew Holzman, who has this great poem called "Mountain Dew Commercial Disguised as a Love Poem," which is a better poem than this one, so you should go read that. But I did mine. So this is how I know it might work. After Matthew Holzman, for Tarfia Faizullah, Mar Prioko. Because your head is a rec room full of the best toys, and your second skull a crate full of the greatest records anyone can be ashamed of. Because you give good whiskey no quarter, back bacon into a corner. Because I want to be sober the next time I hold you, and because that is new. As is the need for roses with no mention of blood. And because I always mention blood, when even now, okay, especially now, whenever I mention roses, you always tempt me to pull from the stem. Because you crossed the roses out of my poems. Because you sang me a song that didn't make sense and didn't pretend it did. Because you insert roses into my poems. Play an instrument I've only heard through a laptop speaker when you were oceans too far. Because you are generous. Because you are grieving. Because you grab at all the voices you can lift, even the broken ones, especially the broken ones, and bury them under your hair until compositions grow. Because I want to remove the rain cloud over your head. I want to replace the rain cloud over your head, become your private storm. I like the way you carry a storm. Carry me, and I'll downpour for you, and run my fingers through the language that sprouts like a garden of paper flowers you make erupt perennial when the page is an empty field. Not even stillness will do. Okay, so this last poem is mad long. Probably should give people a warning. But I didn't read anything in sections. Like somebody told me before that like the scariest number to hear the poetry was 4. Because like when a poet gets to like section 4, you don't know how long the thing is gonna go. You know, when they say 1, you're like, oh, this might be a 2-parter. You know, 2 is like, oh, it's a trilogy, it's a triptych. You know, but so when they say 4, you're man. All right. So this is the most recent poem I've written. And yeah, that's all I'm saying about it. It's called Unsigned Letter to an American Poet in the 21st Century. Dear wide-eyed and deft-fingered, dear lady of the binary mirror, dear in an X-Force clearing, please forgive me if I'm speaking too soon. Are you here yet? Or is it that your presence only looks like arrival because you can't help but be the loudest ghost? If that wasn't you I saw moving towards the edge of a cliff like a moth to a moth that flutters in flames, no worries. I'll leave this here for another time. I write you because you asked me to, though you may not remember the call, though we may not have ever spoken, but I heard it in your verse after you bit your tongue and bragged about the blood. Dear aspirant to the throne of most unassailable victim. I write you because when I opened my mouth to say love, someone said sword again. But Rumi said love, so I'm out in England again, and in Detroit again, and in America still, with my ear pressed to Rumi's red book, and sure enough, the high-pitched slide of a scabbard emptying so that a belly could fill with blade was drowned out for a moment, as love became the madman again, went running down the mountainside out into the everything. I closed my eyes and opened what I didn't know was closed inside, and even now, I still fumble for its name. Maybe it was the opening itself. I write to confess I've known for years the closed-off parts of me need the closed-off parts of you. You are full of more you than is known, and I confess I never bothered to notice, but now I notice everything as my sink overflows, holding a sea, becomes a waterfall, becomes a puddle at my feet, and the floor makes no effort to intervene. I notice an ancient article from just 2 years ago about waterboarding, and another magazine provides a litany of the best ways to be okay with everything your heart stutters about. The bleached white coral, the pistol-full avenues, the bulging penitentiaries. They say the starved are guilty of being hungry, and the headscarfed girl is guilty of being near the detonation. And now I'm noticing my hands. How little they hold. They are teacups, bailing out this vessel not worthy of any sea, and silence is a rag stuffed into the mouth of a gurgling drain. I digress. Dear digital city, scrolling around our world's web, I opened another window full of the seething news. But this time, I could only laugh at what destruction had cloaked itself in. If the gauze-like veil had a name, it would be something along the lines of inevitability. But you are training in an alchemy that can make those first 3 syllables fall away. Destruction doesn't know the strike in the center of it is already past tense. Slaughter is already dying. Let the shark spin in its cage. We only need to live long enough to teach those who will tomorrow drown it in the air. Dear poet, I write because I love you, but must ask for what is impossible. Your body of work must be a world. Treat every book like a city, every poem like a home, every stanza like a room, every line like a family, every word, every syllable like a breath, like a world in between them all, pulsing. Poet, I write because I love you enough to ask for what is terrible. Run farther than your feet can possibly carry your heart. I love you enough to confess that you will fail, but fail somewhere closer to the finish line than if you lie down when the start gun fires. And in this way, you will never fail to be arch, stepping stone, bridge of bone and intellect, of guts and song. Look how lively the children step. Let's nod our heads to their footfalls. Become backbeat with me, and they will sing the songs we forgot to learn. Tell me you wouldn't die for that. Tell me you will live for this. Love
Or for Jamal, yeah. It's a great reading. I'm very honored to read with Jamal May and to be here for my first time at this library and an event with the Poetry Foundation. And in the past couple of years, I had my first appearance in Poetry Magazine, so this is great. It's great to be back in Chicago. I have a grandmother who died in 1968. She was from Czechoslovakia, former Czechoslovakia, and she was my father's mother. She came through Ellis Island, and she partly raised me because she lived with us periodically. When she got tired of her other children, she would move in with my father. She had 4 or 5 languages, mostly Eastern European languages. Her English wasn't very good, so she would make things up in English. For example, she called a colander a macaroni, stop, water, go ahead. So she called me Piscata, which means little bird that sings too much, so it was always Piscata, go get me this little macaroni, stop, water, go ahead. So that's how I learned that you could manipulate language. So The Crossing, this is a poem about her childhood, not mine. No matter how early I woke, how light it was or wet the fields, and whether or not the horses from the stable down the road had broken their fence and were grazing near our windows as horses in a dream, Anna would be gone, already risen, out pounding the earth with her pronged hoe. She never woke me, although I slept beside her, and it was like sleeping near a hill wrapped in house silk. Her teeth floated in water on the nightstand where she kept her spectacles, this woman who had crossed, as a girl of my age, in the hold of a ship for weeks, lowering her bucket of night soil by rope. Then from the sea-rinsed bucket, pouring seawater over herself on the lower deck where bathing was permitted. The salt stiffened her hair and burned her eyes, but she was clean. It isn't what they tell you, Biska, calling me the name of the little bird that sings too much. If there were no cattle, no horses or sheep, and nothing to be sold, they would take people whose passage had been paid and whose forfeit put up. Our papers were in order, and we had the passage and forfeit, money given to a bank to guarantee our upkeep, so we could board the ship with our own blankets. They gave us drinking water, but shut off all water at night. 2 weeks of the rocking boat and stink of buckets, all of us asleep on the planks. Such rise and fall, such pitch of the ship. And some nights on deck, holding the rails for all her life, she said she plowed the sea, as she once did the fields, and into the furrows of light went the seeds, and the black-winged waters fell upon them. That is, we have birds because we're from the same city. There really are a lot of birds in Detroit. And so there are birds all through my poems too, only also no one ever notices them. I'm going to read a poem that is ostensibly about lighthouses. Every time there's a lighthouse somewhere nearby, I go see it. And I want to just be there with it, especially at night when it's flashing around. The only problem is there are lots of people who like to do this. And the problem is lighthouse people all like to be alone at the lighthouse. But you never are, so you're walking around looking at each other weirdly, hoping everyone else will leave. This one contains the history of lighthouses and mentions a certain lighthouse called Hook. Hook is a lighthouse that's just across the water in Ireland from a lighthouse called Crook. So you can sail by hook or by crook. And that's where we get that, I think. So, but this is also about something else. those people who save our lives. The light keeper, a night without ships, foghorns calling into walled cloud, and you still alive, drawn to the light, as if it were a fire kept by monks. Darkness once crusted with stars, but now death dark as you sail inward. Through wild gorse and sea wrack, through heather and torn wool you ran, pulling me by the hand so I might see this for once in my life. The spin and spin of light, the whirring of it. Light in search of the lost, there since the era of fire, era of candles and hollow wick lamps, whale oil and solid wick, colza and lard, kerosene and carbide, the signal fires lighted on this perilous coast in the Tower of Hook. You say to me, stay awake. Be like the lens maker who died with his lungs full of glass. Be the yew in blossom when bees swarm. Be their amber cathedral, and even the ghosts of Cistercians will be kind to you. In a certain light, as after rain, in pearled clouds or the water beyond, seen or sensed water, sea or lake, you would stop still and gaze out for a long time. Also when fireflies opened and closed in the pines, and a star appeared, our only heaven. You taught me to live like this, that after death it would be as it was before we were born. Nothing to be afraid. Nothing but happiness as unbearable as the dread from which it comes. Go toward the light always. Be without ships. You have been with the Poetry Foundation. There was a poet who was here for a while too, Ilya Kaminsky. When Ilya Kaminsky was 19 years old, he showed up in a summer workshop of mine. And Ilya is profoundly deaf. And he was a very young man and was a refugee from Ukraine, from Odessa. He announced that he was from Odessa at the workshop in introducing himself. But the last thing he said was, "And I write poetry for God." And no one else had ever introduced themselves that way. So I just said, okay, well, we'll just take out our poems then. I didn't really know how to approach that. But Ilya and I went back to Ukraine. I took him back there because I thought it was important for him when he was a little bit older to see Odessa again. It was a good idea and not such a good idea because cities, when you grow up, they shrink. When you go back home, everything is small. And it had shrunk for him. We also went to St. Petersburg because he had to visit the shrines of the silver poets of the Russian Silver Age. Anna Akhmatova, Osip Mandelstam, and Marina Tsvetaeva. So we went there too. There is a little town outside St. Petersburg called Tsarskye Selo. That's where Anna Akhmatova went in the summers when she was a girl. But it was also the summer home of the Tsars, and they had their summer palace there. Alexander Pushkin went to school there, and there's now a school there called Pushkin Lycée. And so we were there inside the school, Ilya and I, and this is the poem for Ilya at Tsarskye Selo. We stand at the casement window of Pushkin's Lycée. These are the desks where Pushkin wrote, his chalkboards, his astrolabe. Snow falls from here into the past and vanishes on golden minarets. Snow recedes from the birches. A lesson writes itself in winter chalk. On the day Michelangelo died in Rome, Galileo was born in Pisa. Isaac Newton was born the year Galileo died. When they searched for the poet Kabir, they found nothing beneath his shroud but a sprig of jasmine. Heraclitus says a hidden connection is stronger than an obvious one. Man is like the statue, whispering about the marble chiseled from his mouth. You are the guardian of this statue, standing in your silent world. The year Isaac Newton died, there was a barn fire during a puppet show. Kabir says all corpses go to the same place, and the world has fallen in love with a dream. This life is not the same as your other life. We are here now in one of the shrines of the silver poets. You are one of the silver. The snow is a white peacock in a Russian poem. This is also for Ilya, and it's called Exile. You are a very nice audience. His exile is about his city, Odessa, which looks like it landed there because it was all built at once. And it's all built out of limestone. And behind it are the Russian steppes and all the wheat of the Russian steppes. And this is about going back there. The city of your childhood rises between steppe and sea, wheat and light, white with the dust of cockle shells, stargazers, and bones of pipefish. City of limestone, soft enough to cut with a hatchet, where the sea unfurls and acacias brought by Greeks on their ships turn white in summer. So yes, you remember, this is the city you lost. City of smugglers and violinists, chess players and monkeys, an opera house, a madhouse, a ghost church with wind for its choir, where two things were esteemed: literature and ships, poetry and the sea. If you return now, it will not be as a being visible to others. And when you walk past, it will not be as if a man had passed, but rather as if someone had remembered something long forgotten and wondered why. If you return, your father will be alive to prepare for you his mint cucumber soup or give you the little sweet called bird's milk. And after hours of looking with him for his sandals lost near the sea, you visit again together the amusement park where your ancestors are buried, and then go home to the apartment house built by German prisoners of war to whom your father gave bread, which you remember surprised you. You take the tram to a stop where it is no longer possible to get off. And he walks with you until he vanishes, still holding in his own your invisible hand. Letter to a City Under Siege. This is for a poet who was inside Sarajevo when it was under siege. It happened in the early 90s. And the city was under siege for a long time. The people dug a tunnel under the airport runway to smuggle food in and people out. Many people died. Letter to a City Under Siege. Turning the pages of the book you have lent me of your wounded city, reading the braille on its walls, walking beneath ghost chestnuts, past fires that turn the bullet-shattered windows bronze, flaring an instant without warming the fallen houses, where you sleep without water or light. Biscuit tin cafe ruins, you discuss all night the burnt literature borrowed from a library where old books met with despair. I wanted to give your notes back to you, to be printed in another language, not yours or mine, but a tongue understood by children who make bulletproof vests out of cardboard. We will then lie down in the cemetery where violence grew in your childhood, before snipers fired on the city using gravestones for cover. Friend, absent one, I can tell you that your tunnel is still there, mud-walled and hallowed of earth, dug for smuggling oranges into the city, oranges bright as winter moons by the barrow load. So let's walk further up the street, to the hill where one is able to see the city, woven in fog, roofs filled with sky, uprooted bridges, and a shop window where a shard of glass hangs over the spine of a book. The library burns on page 60, as it burns in all the newspapers of the world. And the clopping of horses' hooves isn't the sound of clopping horses. From here, the dog finds his way through snow with a human bone. And what else but more? Even the clocks aren't spared, having run out of time. But my good friend, the tunnel, the oranges. I wrote a poem 30, I don't want to add it up, more than 30 years ago. And it was a documentary prose poem titled The Colonel. Some of you may have heard of that poem. I didn't bring it and I'm not going to read it, but inside that poem, there's a mention of a friend. The friend says to me with his eyes, saying nothing. And I can say now my friend's name was Leonel Gomez Vidas. Leonel Gomez Vidas was my friend and guide and mentor, first in El Salvador between 1978 and 1980, and then for the next decades. He died on Thanksgiving Eve 2009 of 5 heart attacks in one night. And after he died, I was there with him in Salvador the week before he died. I went home and then I went back to scatter his remains on a volcano. After he died, some memories came back that had been suppressed for a couple of decades. There are some very harsh things in this poem. His voice is also in this poem. And there's a word many of you may know, but in the theme of our birds, the word is zopilotes. These are vultures, carrion birds. So I apologize for the incident in the poem. When we were doing the human rights work, we did a lot of searching for bodies. And bodies would be left there were 2 body dumps where death squads would leave bodies, and you would go there trying to find a match with someone that you were looking for. Often all you had was a school photograph. And the 2 places were El Diablo and El Playón. So this was about one of those searches, The Ghost of Heaven, and it was published in Poetry Magazine, and it won a prize. So we have that in common too. And so thank you for Poetry Magazine for that, for all of that. The Ghost of Heaven, sleep to sleep through 30 years of night. A child, herself with child, for whom we searched. Through here or there amidst bones still sleeved and trousered, a spine picked clean, a paint can, a skull with hair. Night to night, child walking toward me through burning maze, over the clean bones of those whose flesh was lifted by zopilotes into heaven. So is how we ascend, in the clawed feet of fallen angels, to be assembled again in the workrooms of the clouds. She rose from where they found her, lying not far from a water urn, leaving herself behind on the ground, where they found her, holding her arms before her as if she were asleep. Blue smoke rising from corn cribs, the flap of wings, on the walls of the city streets a plague of initials. Walking through a fire-lit river to a burning house, dead singer, sewing machine, and piece of dress. Outside a cashew tree wept, blackened cashews over lamina. Outside, paper fireflies rose to the stars. Bring penicillin if you can, you said. Surgical tape, a whetstone, mosquito repellent, but not the aerosol kind. Especially bring a syringe for sucking phlegm, a knife, wooden sticks, a clamp, and plastic bags. You will also need a bottle of cloud for anesthesia, to sleep like the flight of a crane through colorless dreams. When a leech opens your flesh, it leaves a small volcano. Always pour turpentine over your hair before going to sleep. Such experiences as these are forgotten before memory intrudes. The girl was found, don't say this, with a man's severed head stuffed into her where a child would have been. No one knew who the man was, another of the dead. So they had not, after all, killed a pregnant girl. This was a relief to them. That sound in the brush, a settling of wind in sorghum. If they capture you, talk, please. Yes, you heard me the first time. You will be asked who you are. Eventually, we are all asked who we are. All who come into the world, all who come into the world are sent. Open your curtain of spirit. This is about a beetle that's eating the pine trees of Western Canada and Western United States. Morning on the island. The lights across the water are the waking city. The water shimmers with imaginary fish. Not far from here lie the bones of conifers, washed from the sea and piled by wind. Some mornings I walk upon them, bone to bone, as far as the lighthouse. A strange beetle has eaten most of the trees. It may have come here on the ships playing music in the harbor. Or it was always here, a winged jewel, but in the past was kept still by the cold of a winter that no longer comes. There is an owl living in the firs behind us, but he is white, meant to be mistaken for snow, burdening a bough. They say he is the only owl remaining. I hear him at night, listening for the last of the mice and asking who of no other owl. Sanctuary. This is the she in the poem is Anna again. My grandmother wants to be in every book. I wrote her the first serious poem, which was in my first book, was about Anna. And after she died, I would feel her at night sometimes in the room when I was writing, standing behind me with a rolling pin or something, saying, I want to be in the book. So I've always written a poem for her in every book. I'm afraid not to. Sanctuary. Light peeled bell-like through the canopy, long ago, or seems so. Then the ghost of a deer and crows flapping through smoke. She made a poultice for me of herbs and mud to suck the poison from the boil. And then she went into a mahogany coffin, as there were then. Mornings, horses cantered through ground fog, having broken loose. So I would go out for them, bridles in hand with no one awake. The closer I came to them, the further they moved away. Following them through the clouds is a journey I would make again. This is called Tapestry. This is, we used to make tree forts and ground forts. Do you know what a ground fort is? The ground fort is when you dig a hole in the field and you get boards and grass and things and you cover it up so no one can tell there's a hole there. And you hide in there from the grown-ups and from other kids and dangerous people. It's very dangerous to go into a hole like that, but we didn't know that. We thought of them as our houses. So, tapestry. There is no album for these. No white script on black paper. No dates stamped in a border. No sleeve, no fire. No one has written on the back from left to right. Your hair has not yet fallen out nor grown back. Girl walking toward you out of childhood, not yet herself, having not yet learned to recite before others, and who would never wish to stand on a lighted proscenium, even in a darkened house, but would rather dig a hole in a field and cover herself with barnwood, earth, and hay to be as quiet as plums turning. There is no calendar, no month, no locket, but your name is called and called in the early storm. No one finds you, no one ever finds you, not in a small grave dug by a child as a hiding place, nor years later in the ship's hold, not in the shelter, not high on the roof as the man beside you leapt, not in a basket crossing a vineyard, nor in a convent kitchen on the last night, as a saint soon to be murdered told you how to live your life. Never found you walking in the ruins of the blown barracks, wading in the flooded camp, taking cover in the machinist's shop, or lighting every votive in the Cathedral of Saint-Just with its vaulted choir and transept, its wall of suffering souls. It was just as Brecht wrote, wasn't it? You came in a time of unrest when hunger reigned. You came to the people in a time of uprising, and you rose with them. So the time passed away, which on earth was given you. Gather in your sleep the ripened plums. Stay safe in the earth when your name is called. So the last poem is called Harmology. Harmology is a Greek word. We don't have an equivalent. We should make one up. Anna would help us if she was alive. Harmology is a sadness that is beautiful. You know, it's a sadness that has a joy to it too. It's a sadness that it's mixed. So it's just a weird poem. It's a kind of strange poem. I don't know what it means. I think I'll know what it means later. I think it's about getting old, which I think I'm doing. Okay, Harmology. It begins with a word as small as the cry of Athena's owl, an ache in the cage of breath, as when we say, can hardly breathe. In sleep, we see our name on a stone, for instance. Or while walking in the rain among graves, we feel watched. Others are still coming into our lives. They come, they go out. Some speak quietly beside us on a bench near where koi swim. At night, there is a light sound of wings brushing the walls. Not now is what it sounds like, or two other words, but they are the same passerines as live in the stone eaves, as forage in the air toward night. To see them, one must not be looking. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn Forche and Jamal May, for that wonderful reading.